Right now, somewhere in the world, you could break a law that was written hundreds of years ago, without even knowing it. And the strangest part? Some of these laws were designed for a world of kings, swords, and superstition. Yet they still exist today. This video is about those bizarre ancient laws that never truly died. From a fish that still technically belongs to the king, to rules about what you can wear, eat, or even how you carry a salmon. Yes, that's a real law. We're going to uncover the strangest legal leftovers from history. By the end, you'll realize that the past doesn't just sit in dusty books. It lingers, hidden in the rules that still shape our modern lives. The Royal Fish Law, England, 1324. Imagine standing on the rugged coast of medieval England in the year 1324. Fishermen are hauling in their daily catch, cod, herring, maybe even a few eels. But suddenly, the waves deliver something extraordinary. The immense carcass of a whale. For most people, this would seem like a stroke of unbelievable luck. After all, a single whale could feed an entire village. Yet, in medieval England, this was no mere fisherman's prize. It was property of the crown itself, thanks to one of the strangest and longest-lasting laws in English history, the Royal Fish Law. This law, enacted during the reign of King Edward II, declared that any whale or sturgeon found on the shores of England automatically belonged to the king. These sea creatures weren't considered ordinary animals. They were royal fish. But why would a monarch, ruling over vast lands and armies, care so much about a washed-up whale or a slippery sturgeon? The answer lies in power, wealth, and symbolism. Whales were massive sources of valuable materials. Their blubber could be boiled into oil for lamps, their bones used for construction, and their meat, though tough, could sustain communities. But beyond their practical use, whales represented majesty. Huge, awe-inspiring creatures that symbolized dominion over land and sea. For a medieval king, claiming these animals wasn't about dinner, it was about reinforcing authority. The law even divided the spoils. Tradition stated that the king would claim the head of a whale, while the queen received the tail. Why? Because the tail contained the finest whalebone, used to make corsets, fans, and other luxury items reserved for royalty. Even in death, a whale's body served the monarchy's image and influence. Perhaps most fascinating is that this law didn't simply vanish with time. It still technically exists in the United Kingdom today. In fact, in the modern era, there have been quirky cases where whales washed ashore and the crown still claimed ownership. For example, in 2004, a giant sturgeon was caught off the Welsh coast. By law, it belonged to the Queen. The fisherman had to request royal permission just to keep his unusual catch. The Royal Fish Law reflects a larger truth about medieval governance. Kings and queens were constantly seeking ways to remind their subjects of who held ultimate authority. Even the sea, wild and untamed, was under royal jurisdiction. And while it might sound bizarre to modern ears, these laws were part of the fabric of everyday life, blending survival, politics, and superstition. Today, the Royal Fish Law survives mostly as a curiosity, a relic of a time when the line between nature and monarchy blurred. It's a reminder that, in the Middle Ages, power was absolute, extending not only over people and land, but over the creatures of the sea. The next time you hear about a whale stranded on British shores, remember, in theory, it's still the property of the crown, a living echo of a law written nearly 700 years ago. The Longbow Law, killing a Welshman in Chester. In the medieval world, laws were often born not from justice, but from fear, politics, and prejudice. Few examples are as shocking as the so-called Longbow Law of Chester, England. According to this law, dating back to the late Middle Ages, it was legal for an Englishman to shoot and kill a Welshman with a longbow within the city walls of Chester, so long as it was after nightfall. Some versions even suggest that it was only permissible on Sundays. But how did such a brutal law come into existence? To understand, we must look at the turbulent relationship between the English and the Welsh in the 13th and 14th centuries. After Edward I's conquest of Wales in 1282, tensions ran high. The Welsh resisted English rule through repeated uprisings, and border towns like Chester were hotbeds of hostility. To the English authorities, the Welsh were not just neighbors but perceived threats. Harsh laws were designed to keep them in check and to remind them of their subjugation. While historians now agree that the Longbow Law was more of a municipal statute than a kingdom-wide edict, its legacy is haunting. It symbolizes an age when entire groups of people could be targeted by law simply for who they were. Today, the idea that such a law might still technically exist, though of course it is no longer enforced, adds to the strange fascination of medieval justice. It reminds us how far society has come, and yet how dangerous unchecked power and prejudice can be. A law that once justified violence now serves as a chilling historical footnote, an echo of a darker, divided past. Ancient Greece, women forbidden from watching the Olympics. In the grand stadiums of ancient Greece, where athletes competed in the name of Zeus, one rule stood above all others. Women were forbidden from even watching the Olympic Games. From the very first Olympics in 776 BC, the event was celebrated as a festival of male strength, endurance, and religious devotion. But for women, participation, and even spectating was considered a crime. The ban was rooted in Greek tradition and religion. The games were dedicated to Zeus, the king of the gods, and athletics were seen as a test of masculine virtue. The athletes competed nude, symbolizing purity and devotion. But this also reinforced why women were excluded. To Greek society, a woman witnessing such displays of male bodies was both indecent and dangerous to the sacred order of the festival. Punishment was harsh. Historical accounts claim that if a married woman was caught sneaking into the games, she could be executed by being thrown off Mount Typeum, a steep cliff near Olympia. The severity of the law reflects how deeply the Greeks valued the exclusivity of their traditions. But there were exceptions. The priestess of Demeter, the goddess of harvest, was the only woman allowed to attend, seated in a place of honor near the stadium altar. Additionally, unmarried women could take part in a separate event, the Heraean Games, dedicated to the goddess Hera. This ancient law reveals the stark gender divisions of the time. While men immortalized themselves through feats of strength, women were forced to the sidelines, remembered only through myth and rare exceptions. Today, the Olympic Games symbolize inclusivity and unity, but their origins remind us of a world where half the population was deliberately silenced. Medieval sumptuary laws, regulating clothing. Imagine living in a world where the clothes you wore weren't a matter of personal taste, but a matter of law. That was the reality in much of medieval Europe, where sumptuary laws strictly dictated what people could or could not wear. These laws first appeared in the Middle Ages and were designed to reinforce the rigid class system. Nobles feared that wealthy merchants, traders, and the rising middle class were blurring the lines of social order by dressing like aristocrats. To prevent this, monarchs and city councils issued detailed regulations. In England, for example, the statutes of apparel under Elizabeth I specified exactly who could wear certain fabrics. Only nobles were allowed to wear velvet, silk, or ermine fur, while commoners were restricted to wool or linen. Even the color purple, a dye associated with royalty, was reserved exclusively for the highest ranks. Violating these laws wasn't taken lightly. Offenders could face heavy fines, public shaming, and in some cases imprisonment. But it wasn't just about fashion, it was about control. By limiting appearance, rulers kept a visible hierarchy. You could instantly tell someone's status simply by looking at their clothes. Interestingly, sumptuary laws weren't limited to England. In Florence, wealthy women were banned from wearing elaborate jewelry. In Japan, during the Edo period, commoners were forbidden from wearing silk. And in China, only the emperor could wear bright yellow. Over time, these laws became harder to enforce. The growing power of trade and wealth made it impossible to contain personal expression through clothing. By the 17th century, most of these restrictions had faded away. Yet, they remind us how fashion has always been political, woven deeply into power, class, and identity. Medieval church laws, no eating meat on Fridays. In medieval Europe, religion was not just a belief system. It was the backbone of everyday life. The Catholic Church held immense power, shaping not only spiritual matters but also what people could eat, when, and why. One of the most famous regulations was the ban on eating meat on Fridays. This law wasn't just about diet. It was about discipline, sacrifice, and obedience to the church. Friday was chosen to commemorate the crucifixion of Christ, a day of solemn reflection and penance. Meat, seen as rich and indulgent, was forbidden. Instead, people turned to fish, vegetables, and grains. This simple rule had profound consequences. Fish markets flourished. Entire economies were reshaped by this law. Ports, rivers, and coastal towns grew wealthier, while butchers faced losses every Friday. Some monasteries even became known for their innovative fish recipes, creating dishes that blurred the line between luxury and austerity. But as with any law, there were loopholes and defiance. The wealthy often bent the rules, indulging in elaborate fish feasts that rivaled meat banquets. Meanwhile, the poor struggled to adapt, since fish wasn't always cheap or easy to find inland. The church enforced the law with seriousness. Breaking the Friday fast wasn't just frowned upon. It was considered a sin, requiring confession and penance. The regulation was so powerful it shaped culinary traditions across Europe, some of which remain today. Even now, centuries later, many Christians still avoid meat on Fridays, especially during Lent. What began as a strict medieval law has left behind a lasting cultural footprint, reminding us of how deeply the church once controlled not just the soul, but also the stomach. The law against night singing, Switzerland. Imagine a peaceful Swiss village nestled in the mountains, the moon casting silver light on the rooftops, and a group of friends gathering to sing. You might think it's a harmless pastime, but for centuries, in parts of Switzerland, singing at night wasn't just frowned upon. It was against the law. This unusual law, which appeared in several Swiss cantons during the Middle Ages, was rooted in a desire for order and silence. Singing, especially in groups, was associated with drinking, rowdy gatherings, and potential unrest. Authorities believed that if people were allowed to sing freely at night, it would encourage unruly behavior, disturb sleep, and possibly even incite rebellion. In fact, many ordinances explicitly banned night singing after curfew, often alongside prohibitions on gambling and loud instruments. But this wasn't only about noise control, it was about morality. The church and civic leaders of medieval Switzerland saw music as a powerful force that could uplift the spirit, but also corrupt the soul if left unchecked. Secular songs, tavern chants, and love ballads were seen as distractions from piety and discipline. By outlawing night singing, they hoped to keep communities sober, quiet, and obedient. What's remarkable is that some of these bans lingered in Swiss law codes well into modern times. In certain regions, even in the 19th century, ordinances against loud singing after dark were still occasionally enforced. Today, Switzerland still has strict noise regulations, and while you won't be arrested for humming a tune, there are quiet hours, typically after 10 p.m., where excessive noise, including loud music, is legally restricted. So, a cheerful midnight chorus in medieval Switzerland might not have earned applause. It might have earned you a fine. Hammurabi's Code, Eye for an Eye, Babylon, 1754 BC. In the ancient city of Babylon, nearly 4,000 years ago, one of the earliest and most famous legal codes in history was carved into stone, the Code of Hammurabi. Written around 1754 BC by King Hammurabi, it contained 282 laws designed to maintain order and justice in his empire. But the law most remembered is the brutal principle of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This was known as lex talionis, the law of retribution. If a man put out another man's eye, his own eye would be taken. If he broke another man's bone, his own bone would be broken. The idea was simple. The punishment should mirror the crime. To Hammurabi, this created fairness and deterred wrongdoing in a society where order was fragile. But the law wasn't applied equally. Social class mattered. If a nobleman injured another nobleman, the punishment was direct and harsh. But if a noble injured a slave, the fine could be money instead of mutilation. Justice, even in Hammurabi's Babylon, was tied to status. Beyond violence, the code covered daily life, trade, marriage, property, debts, and even the duties of builders. One striking law stated, if a builder constructed a house that collapsed and killed the owner, the builder would be executed. Accountability was not just financial, it was life and death. The Code of Hammurabi gives us a window into one of humanity's first attempts at structured justice. Harsh by modern standards, It showed that even in 1754 BC, people understood the need for law, order, and consequences. The eye for an eye principle still echoes through history, reminding us how ancient justice shaped modern ideas of crime and punishment. Roman laws on purple, reserved for emperors. In ancient Rome, power wasn't just about titles, armies, or wealth. It could be displayed in something as simple as the color of your clothing. Purple, the rarest and most expensive dye of the ancient world, became the ultimate symbol of authority. Extracted painstakingly from tens of thousands of tiny sea snails called murex, just a small quantity of this dye could cost a fortune. Because of its rarity, purple garments became closely associated with Rome's rulers. Over time, the Roman state enforced strict laws, known as sumptuary laws, to regulate who could wear purple. By the height of the empire, only the emperor himself could legally wear an entirely purple toga, known as the toga picta. Senators were permitted a narrow purple stripe on their robes, while equestrians had to settle for an even thinner band. For everyone else, wearing purple could be seen as an act of treason. This was more than fashion, it was politics. Clothing defined status, and purple became synonymous with imperial power. To wear it without permission was to challenge the emperor's authority directly. In fact, there are accounts of men being executed simply for daring to dress in purple, as it was seen as a symbolic attempt to usurp the throne. The Roman obsession with purple shows how societies used laws to enforce hierarchy, even through something as seemingly trivial as fabric. To this day, purple is still associated with royalty and prestige, a legacy of Rome's strict color laws. In the end, the law wasn't just about cloth, it was about control, a reminder that in Rome, even colors were political weapons.